Hey, my name is Theo Marsh. I'm 32, and I live alone in a small apartment on the edge of Columbus, Ohio. For the past 6 years, I've driven a school bus for the district, Route 12, the same loop every morning and every afternoon. I didn't grow up wanting to do this. After my father died, I left auto repair school to come home and take care of my mother. When she passed a few years later, most of the people I knew my age already had steady jobs or families of their own. I needed something reliable, something that would let me start over without too many questions. The bus driving position was the first thing that came up. At first, I told myself it was only temporary, but the longer I did it, the more I realized I was suited for it in ways I hadn't expected. Every morning, I drive the same streets, stop at the same corners, and watch more than 40 kids climb aboard. In the afternoon, I take them back home one by one. The work looks simple from the outside, but after a while, you start noticing things most people miss. The way a child steps onto the bus can tell you a lot about how their morning went. Some bound up the steps with their backpacks swinging, already talking before they even sit down. Others keep their heads low because they were yelled at before they left the house. Some haven't eaten, some didn't sleep, and some are carrying something much heavier than any backpack should hold. About a year and a half ago, a new student joined my route. His name was Sam Frost. He was 6. The first morning he stepped on, I noticed his silence right away. It wasn't ordinary shyness. He moved slowly, both arms wrapped tight around his backpack like he was shielding himself. When I leaned down and said good morning, he didn't look at me and didn't answer. He walked straight to the third row on the right, sat against the window, and stared outside for the entire ride. The next day was the same. And the day after that. Over time, I pieced together what had happened. His father had died in a car accident when Sam was 4. Before that, people said he had been a lively kid who told stories and made everyone laugh. After the funeral, he stopped speaking. The doctors called it selective mutism, brought on by trauma. His mother had tried therapists, specialists, extra support at school, everything she could think of. But after more than a year, Sam still only answered with nods or shakes of his head. I knew his mother was wealthy and busy. Sam always arrived neatly dressed, and the woman who brought him to the stop every morning was named Pilar. The house they left from was large and set back from the road. But I didn't spend much time thinking about the family's money. To me, Sam was just a little boy carrying a pain he didn't know how to put into words. I never tried to make him talk. Every morning when he climbed the steps, I would say in the same calm voice I used with every child, "Good morning, Sam. Glad to see you." I didn't ask how he was feeling. I didn't coax or bargain or promise stickers if he answered. After the greeting, I let him walk to his seat without any more attention. In the afternoons, it was the same short exchange. "Sam's here. Come on up, buddy." He never replied, but after a few weeks, I noticed he started looking at me a little longer before turning away. On the way to school, we passed a house on Maple Street that had a big golden retriever in the yard. Every time the bus went by, the dog ran to the fence, tail wagging, watching us. Sam's face changed whenever he saw it. He would sit up straighter, press his small hand flat against the glass, and stare until the house was out of sight. It was the only moment during the whole ride when he seemed to forget, just for a few seconds, that he was supposed to stay quiet. Once I understood that, I started slowing down every time we reached that stretch of road. Not enough to make the other kids notice, just enough to give Sam a longer look. I never pointed at the dog or made a comment. I simply eased off the gas for a few extra seconds. One afternoon, as Sam was stepping off the bus, he stopped on the bottom step and turned back. He looked at me, then pointed in the direction we had just come from. His eyes held a clear question. "You saw it too, didn't you? You slowed down on purpose?" I kept my answer simple. I smiled and said, "That's a nice dog, isn't it? You look for him every day, same as me." Sam studied my face for a long moment. Then he nodded once, very small, and got off the bus. That was the first real exchange we ever had, even though he hadn't spoken a single word. After that, things changed in quiet ways. Sam began to wave when he saw the bus coming. One morning, he handed me a drawing he had made, a yellow bus parked beside a brown dog, then immediately turned his face to the window as if he regretted letting me see it. I taped the picture to the sun visor above my seat. The next day, when he climbed on and spotted it, the corner of his mouth lifted in the smallest smile I had ever seen from him. For 18 months, that was the shape of our mornings and afternoons. I greeted him the same way every day. I slowed the bus in front of the house on Maple Street. I treated him exactly like every other child on the route. We never had long conversations. He never told me stories. But I came to understand that Sam had decided somewhere along the way that I was the one adult who didn't look at him like a problem that needed fixing. I had no idea that one evening, in a room full of the most powerful people in the city, that quiet understanding would matter more than anything else. The invitation came in early spring. The district was holding its annual fundraising gala at the Grand Wellington downtown. And for once, they wanted someone from every department, including transportation. My name ended up on the list. The principal said it would be good for the donors to see that a school wasn't run only by administrators and teachers. I tried to decline. I didn't own a suit that fit, and I had no interest in standing around with people who wrote checks larger than my yearly salary. But in the end, I rented the cheapest black suit I could find and told myself I would stay for 1 hour, shake a few hands, and leave. The hotel ballroom was everything I expected. High ceilings, white tablecloths, chandeliers that made the silverware sparkle. I stayed near the service door at the back where the staff came and went with trays. It felt safer there. I was trying to figure out whether I was supposed to eat the tiny appetizers with a fork or my fingers when I looked up at the big screen above the stage and saw a name printed in large letters. Adeline Frost, Chief Executive Officer, Frost Technologies, Principal Sponsor. I had never heard the name before that night. But when the woman in the deep blue dress stepped onto the stage, I understood immediately who she was. She carried herself with the kind of calm that comes from running meetings, where millions of dollars are discussed. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and when she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. Sam stood beside her in a small matching vest, one hand clutching the side of her dress. He kept glancing around the room like he was looking for an exit. From the conversations drifting around me, I learned the rest. After her husband died, Adeline had taken over the company while raising a son who had stopped speaking. She was also the target of constant attention from men who saw her wealth and position as an opportunity. Some of them were genuine, most were not. The ones who weren't had learned to use Sam as a way in: expensive gifts, loud compliments about how smart he looked, promises to take him to ball games. The moment Adeline turned her head, their smiles disappeared. She had grown tired of it. A few months earlier, she had announced in front of her board and family that she would not remarry unless Sam himself chose the man. The story had spread quickly through the city's business circles. Everyone understood what it really meant. Sam did not speak to strangers, and he certainly did not warm to the men who suddenly became interested in him because of his mother's money. The declaration was her way of closing the door. I watched several of those men approach her that night. One handed Sam a box with a model car inside. Another patted his head and called him champ. They smiled warmly while Adeline was looking, then went back to ignoring the boy the second she looked away. Sam's shoulders grew smaller with every interaction. His fingers twisted tighter in the fabric of her dress. I wanted to walk over and say hello to him, the same way I did every morning at the bus stop, but I stayed where I was. I was only a bus driver who had been invited because someone made a list. I had no business inserting myself into his mother's world. After her speech, the MC mentioned her generous donation and made a light joke about the famous promise she had made. Adeline smiled the polite smile people use when they cannot afford to look annoyed. Her hand on Sam's shoulder tightened until her knuckles showed. Sam was scanning the room again. His eyes moved across the tables, the waiters, the clusters of men in expensive suits. Then they stopped. He had found me standing by the service door. For a few seconds, he just stared. I gave him the smallest wave, the same one I used when he stepped onto the bus. He didn't wave back. He kept looking at me like he was making sure I was really there. Then, while one of the men was still talking to him, Sam let go of his mother's dress. Adeline turned immediately, her face changing from polite hostess to something close to fear. She called his name, but Sam didn't stop. He started walking across the ballroom, past the round tables, past the men who turned to watch him, past the waiters frozen with trays in their hands. He didn't run. He walked with the same quiet determination he used every morning when he climbed the bus steps and went straight to his seat. The room began to quiet down as people noticed the small boy moving alone through the crowd. By the time he reached the back, most of the conversations had stopped. I looked behind me, thinking he must be heading towards someone else, but there was only the wall and a stack of empty trays. Sam stopped in front of me. Up close, I could see how hard he was breathing. His hands were shaking. He looked up at me for a long moment, then reached out and took hold of my hand. His fingers were small and cold and surprisingly strong. The entire ballroom went silent. I could hear a glass being set down somewhere nearby. Sam's voice, when it finally came, was hoarse from disuse. It was barely louder than a whisper, but every word was clear. "This is my friend," he said. "He looks at the dog with me." I felt the words land in my chest like something physical. 18 months of silence, and the first thing he chose to say in front of a room full of strangers was that I was his friend. Adeline had followed him. She stopped a few steps away, both hands covering her mouth. Tears were already running down her face, ruining the careful makeup she had worn on stage. She wasn't crying because of any promise about marriage. She was crying because she was hearing her son's voice for the first time since her husband's funeral. Someone near the stage laughed and called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Looks like Sam finally picked a husband for his mother." A few scattered chuckles followed. Then the whole room seemed to turn and look at me at once. I glanced at Adeline. The relief and shock on her face were already being replaced by something else: confusion, worry, and a quick flash of fear. She knew exactly what the room was waiting for. They wanted the fairy tale ending. They wanted the bus driver to smile, walk over, and play along with the joke so everyone could clap and feel good about themselves. But Sam was still holding my hand. He hadn't chosen a husband for his mother. He had only chosen the one person in the room who had never asked him to be anything other than exactly who he was. I knelt down so my eyes were level with Sam's. The entire room was still watching, but I turned my back to them and tried to make the space between us feel like the inside of the bus in the mornings, small and ordinary. "Sam," I said quietly, "what you just did was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do." His eyes were glassy. I could feel how tightly he was holding onto my hand. "Thank you for telling everyone I'm your friend," I continued, "because that's exactly what we are. We'll always be friends." I felt his shoulders drop a little. The shaking in his fingers eased. I stood up and turned to face Adeline. She had lowered her hands, but her face was still wet. She looked at me with gratitude and confusion and a clear thread of caution, like she was waiting to see how I would use this moment. I spoke loud enough for the people closest to us to hear. "Mrs. Frost, Sam is one of the best kids on my route. Driving him to school every morning is an honor." I paused, then added, "But I think something needs to be said clearly. Sam didn't choose a husband for his mother tonight. He chose a friend for himself." The whispers around us stopped. I looked down at Sam again. What he did was honest and brave. I don't want anyone turning it into a joke or a prize for the adults in the room. Then I leaned closer to him. "I'll still be there Monday morning, and I'll still slow down on Maple Street." Sam nodded. After a second, he whispered, so softly only I could hear it, "Okay." Adeline's eyes filled again. I picked up my coat from the back of a chair and walked out of the ballroom. My hands were still shaking when I reached the parking garage. I didn't feel noble. I felt angry. Angry that grown people had turned the hardest moment of a 6-year-old's life into entertainment. I kept seeing the way Sam had walked across that huge room by himself. I kept hearing his voice saying those 7 words, and I kept wondering what would happen to him now that everyone had witnessed it. I drove home, took off the rented suit, and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. On Monday morning, I arrived at Sam's stop 10 minutes early. I didn't know if he would still be riding the bus. After what happened at the gala, Adeline had every right to keep him home or switch him to a private car. But at the usual time, the big gate opened and Sam came running out with Pilar behind him. When he saw the bus, he slowed down for a second, then smiled. The real kind, not the careful one he used at school. He climbed the steps. I kept my voice exactly the same as every other morning. "Good morning, Sam. Glad to see you." He looked at me for a moment. His mouth moved like he was testing the words. Then he answered, voice still a little rough from disuse but clear. "Me too." I couldn't stop the smile that spread across my face, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. I just nodded toward his usual seat. "Find your spot, buddy." When we passed the house on Maple Street, I eased off the gas like always. The golden retriever ran to the fence, tail swinging. Sam watched it, then looked up at me in the mirror. He looks happy today. I think so too, I said. After we finished the afternoon route, I saw a woman standing near the stop on Maple Street. She was wearing jeans and a simple jacket, no assistant with her, no expensive coat. If I hadn't seen her on the stage 3 nights earlier, I might have thought she was just another mother waiting for her child. Sam got off with Pilar and walked toward the house. Adeline stayed where she was. I turned off the engine and stepped down from the bus. We stood a few feet apart. For several seconds, neither of us knew how to start. Finally, she looked at me and said, "I came to thank you." "I didn't do anything special," I answered. She shook her head. "You did the one thing no man who's approached me in the last 2 years has been willing to do. You saw Sam before you saw me." I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet. She turned and looked at the dog behind the fence. Everyone in that room that night thought my promise was a competition. They believed whoever Sam picked would get me and everything that comes with me. You were the only one who protected him from the promise itself. There was real regret in her voice. She told me she had made the announcement because she was exhausted. After her husband died, men kept appearing, some sincere, most not. She thought naming Sam as the condition would make them stop. She hadn't realized it would also turn her son into a gatekeeper for her personal life. "I was trying to protect myself," she said. "I didn't see that I was putting him in the middle." I leaned against the side of the bus. "He doesn't need anyone to replace his father. He just needs the adults around him to stop trying to make him go back to who he was before." Adeline looked down at the sidewalk. The words seemed to land somewhere deep. She admitted that for 18 months she had been terrified he would never speak again. Because of that fear, she had taken him to every news specialist, asked him constantly how he felt, and waited for every small sign. "I thought I was helping him," she said, voice tight. "But maybe every time I looked at him, he felt like something that needed to be fixed." I didn't offer empty comfort. "You're his mother," I said. "You're scared because you love him. But sometimes a kid needs to know the adults still love him, even when he can't go back to who he used to be." She studied my face for a long time. We stood there beside the road for almost half an hour. She talked about her husband and the quiet house after he was gone. I talked about the kids on my route and how sometimes their silence said more than words ever could. Neither of us mentioned the marriage promise again. Neither of us talked about the gala like it was the beginning of something romantic. We were just two tired people who both cared about the same quiet boy. Before she left, Adeline hesitated, then asked, "Would you let me buy you a coffee sometime?" Not as the sponsor of the school or as Sam's mother, just as a thank you between two normal people. I almost said no. Part of me was afraid any connection to her would turn the rumors from the gala into something real. I didn't want Sam to think his trust in me had become a reason for me to get close to his mother. But when I looked at her, I saw the same exhaustion I carried some days, the kind that comes from carrying too much alone for too long. I nodded. "One coffee sounds fine." Our first coffee was at a small place on the far side of the city, the kind of cafe that didn't have a line and where the tables were far enough apart that you could talk without being overheard. Adeline had chosen it on purpose. She arrived early and was already sitting by the window when I walked in, wearing a cream-colored sweater and jeans. No assistant, no phone on the table, just her. She stood up when she saw me, then seemed unsure whether that was the right thing to do. I realized that running a company with thousands of employees had not prepared her for something as ordinary as meeting someone for coffee with no agenda. We started with Sam because that felt safest. She told me he had begun speaking more at home. Short sentences at first, mostly about the dog on Maple Street, the bus, and the drawing he had given me. One night he had asked, out of nowhere, what kind of dog his father used to like. Adeline's voice caught when she described how she had answered while trying not to cry. Sam had smiled at her answer. It was the first time in 18 months he had asked a question about his father. After that first meeting, things became easier. We met once a week at first. Then Adeline started waiting near the bus stop on Maple Street after the afternoon route, sometimes with 2 cups of coffee, one for me and one for Pilar. We talked about work, about the neighborhoods we grew up in, about the lives we had pictured for ourselves when we were younger, and the ones we actually ended up living. She told me she and her husband had started Frost Technologies in a rented garage with almost nothing. After he died, she had to step into every role at once: CEO, single mother, grieving widow, while the company's board watched to see if she would fail. During the day, she had to look unbreakable in front of her employees. At night, she would sit outside Sam's bedroom door and wonder where she had gone wrong. I told her about leaving school to take care of my mother, and how after she was gone, I never went back because it already felt too late. I explained that I had seen the bus driver job as something temporary, something to pay the bills until I figured out what came next. Somewhere along the way, I realized the work actually mattered to me. Adeline didn't offer sympathy or suggest I should be doing something more impressive. She simply said, "You see the job the way very few people see it. Maybe that's why Sam trusts you." That answer stayed with me. We kept the time we spent together separate from Sam at first. I didn't want to suddenly appear in his house just because I was getting to know his mother. After everything he had been through, any change needed to happen slowly. Adeline understood that. One Saturday, she asked Sam if he would like to go to the park with both of us. She didn't decide for him. She waited for his answer. He thought about it for a long time, then nodded. At the park, Sam brought a ball but mostly just walked beside us, watching the dogs running across the grass. When a golden retriever came close, the owner let Sam pet it. He knelt down and buried both hands in the soft fur, and for the first time since I had known him, his whole face opened up with pure, uncomplicated happiness. Adeline stood a few steps away and watched him without saying anything. I saw tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. I don't remember exactly when her hand found mine. It happened without either of us planning it. We both paused, surprised by the contact. She started to pull away, but I held on gently. That was the first time we admitted, without words, that whatever was growing between us was no longer only about Sam. That same evening, I made sure we were clear with each other. "I care about you," I told her. "But I don't want Sam to think that because he chose me at the gala, the two of us are now supposed to become some kind of family. That's not fair to him." Adeline nodded. "I don't want that either. Sam chose you for himself. Whatever happens between us has to be our choice, not something that was decided for us that night." We agreed to move slowly. No announcements, no appearing together at events, no letting Sam overhear conversations about a future we weren't even sure existed yet. For many months, our relationship lived in ordinary spaces. Early breakfasts before my route, walks after Sam had gone to bed, quiet talks on her back porch when the house was finally still. Adeline began to trust that I wasn't there because of her money or her company. And I began to see that she wasn't looking for someone to step into the empty space her husband had left. She just wanted to be seen as a person again, not as a CEO or a wealthy widow or a prize that came with a corporation. One evening, after I had driven her home, we stood outside the gate for a long time. She looked at the big house behind her and asked, almost in a whisper, "Do you ever wish I didn't have all of this? The company, the money, the people who are always watching?" I thought about it before answering. "Sometimes I wish things were simpler, but I don't want you to become someone else just so I feel more comfortable." She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "What do you see when you look at me?" I answered honestly, "A woman who's had to be strong for too long, a mother who's afraid she's never doing enough, and someone who sometimes needs to sit with a cup of coffee without having to make decisions for an entire company." Adeline laughed softly, but her eyes filled again. She stepped forward and put her arms around me. I held her the same way I would have held anyone who had carried too much alone for too many years. When she lifted her face, I didn't rush. I waited until she leaned in first. The kiss was quiet. There were no cameras, no applause, no dramatic music. Just the two of us finally choosing each other without anyone else deciding it had to happen. Nearly a year after the gala, Sam was speaking more. He still had days when the words disappeared, especially when he was tired or surrounded by too many people. But he talked to his classmates now, answered his teachers, and told me long, rambling stories about his day the moment he stepped onto the bus. Most of those stories were about dogs. Adeline took him to an animal rescue center one Saturday. She didn't want to buy a dog just because it looked good in pictures or fit some idea of what their family should have. She wanted Sam to choose an animal that actually felt like his. He walked past the cages slowly until he stopped in front of a young golden mix with a white patch on its chest and one ear that always flopped down. When the volunteer asked what he wanted to name it, Sam answered without hesitation, "Maple." Adeline turned and looked at me across the room. She didn't say anything, but we both understood. Our relationship became known to family and a few close friends. Predictably, some articles appeared online calling me the luckiest bus driver in the state, or suggesting I had planned everything from the beginning. The attention bothered me more than I expected. Adeline handled it with one short statement to the press. Her son had chosen a friend he trusted. She and I had then chosen each other separately and on our own terms. Two different things. I kept driving Route 12. People asked why I didn't quit once things with Adeline became serious. Some assumed I was trying to prove I wasn't after her money. The truth was simpler. Every morning I still saw children step onto the bus carrying things no one else noticed. Some of them would never go through what Sam went through, but every single one of them needed to hear, at least once a day, that someone was glad they showed up. I wanted to keep being that person. A year and a half after our first coffee, I asked Adeline to marry me on Maple Street, under the big tree near the house with the dog. Sam stood a little ways off with the new maple, letting the two dogs get used to each other. I told Adeline the truth as plainly as I could. Sam had given us the chance to see each other, but I was choosing her because she was the woman who had stood at the bus stop in the cold just to thank me. The mother who had admitted she made mistakes and then tried to do better. The person who could run an entire company but still worried. She didn't know what kind of birthday cake her son actually liked. I told her I wasn't choosing the promise from that night, or the company, or anyone else's story. I was choosing her. She cried and said yes. The wedding was small, held in the garden behind the house. No big guest list, no press. Just family, a few friends, Sam's teacher, Pilar, and the colleagues from the bus yard I was closest to. Sam wore a small vest and spent most of the afternoon running around with Maple, talking to anyone who would listen. He proudly told several guests that he had chosen the frosting on the cake, even though he had really only picked the flavor of the icing. Before the ceremony started, Sam came over and straightened my tie, even though it didn't need straightening. Then he looked at me seriously and asked two questions. "You're still going to drive the bus, right?" "Yes." "And you'll still slow down on Maple Street?" "Every single day." He hugged me then, tight and quick, the way little boys do when they're trying not to show how much something matters. A lot of people still tell our story like it was simple. A bus driver got chosen by a billionaire's son and ended up marrying the rich mother. That version is easier to understand, I suppose, but it was never the real story. Sam didn't pick me because I was better than the other men in that ballroom. He picked me because for 18 months I never asked him to speak, never tried to buy his affection, and never treated him like a doorway to his mother. I just said good morning. I taped his drawing above my seat, and I slowed the bus down so he could look at a dog a little longer. Those things were small. Most of the adults at the gala would have said they weren't worth anything. But to a child who had spent a year and a half feeling like he was something broken that needed to be repaired, having even one person see him without demanding he become someone else was everything. Sam didn't choose a husband for his mother that night. He chose the person who made him feel safe. And by doing that, he opened a door. Adeline and I walked through it on our own.